Imagine a winter so vicious it turns breath to ice and buries hope beneath endless snow, where old hatreds freeze harder than the ground itself. In 1878, in the bitter frontier town of Red Hollow, New Mexico, a lone Comanche warrior, shunned and nameless to the townsfolk, stood up and said he would live in a remote cave and grow food through the dead of winter. The room exploded in mockery. A man forged in war, they sneered, could never coax life from frozen stone. Yet one person didn't laugh. Eleanor Hayes, a young white widow still hollowed by grief after losing her husband to last year's cold. She followed him into the mountains, straight into a collision of worlds that would test everything they thought they knew about enemies, survival, and redemption. What price must be paid when desperate people beg for shelter at a door guarded by the man they once hunted? And can something as fragile as winter greens truly thaw decades of blood-deep hate? This story ends in a moment so powerful it has left millions in tears. Stay with me to the final word. You'll never forget it. If that hooked you, subscribe right now. Comment where you're watching from, and share this video. Trust me, you need to hear the rest. The wind off the Sangre de Cristos cut like a skinning knife that autumn of 1878. Red Hollow huddled in its shallow valley, a scatter of raw lumber shacks and false front stores, the air thick with coal smoke and the sour stink of fear. Winter was coming early. Everyone felt it in their bones. Inside the only saloon worth the name, Hargrove's, lamplight flickered over bearded faces hunched around whiskey glasses. Talk was of the usual: poor grazing, high freight prices, and how many head they might lose before spring. The batwing doors creaked open. Cold air rolled in with a tall figure wrapped in a faded army coat, long black hair tied back with rawhide. No one spoke his name. They never had. To the men of Red Hollow, he was simply the Comanche, a ghost from the border wars who had somehow outlived the raids, the treaties, the reservations. He carried no rifle tonight, only the quiet weight of eyes that had seen too much. He walked to the bar, laid down a silver dollar, and waited until the room's murmur died. In careful English, slow as a man picking his way across thin ice, he said, "This winter, I will live in the cave at Raven Canyon. I will grow food there, enough to see the cold through." For a heartbeat, the saloon was silent. Then it cracked wide open with laughter. Big Jack Hargrove himself slapped the bar so hard the bottles jumped. "A Comanche farming? Hell, boy, you couldn't grow whiskers on a billy goat." Another voice, thick with drink. "Next he'll be knitting quilts and singing hymns." The laughter rolled louder, mean and easy, the kind men use when they need to remind themselves who's on top. Only one person didn't join in. Eleanor Hayes sat alone at a corner table, a shawl pulled tight around her thin shoulders. 28 years old, hair the color of dry wheat, eyes still carrying the hollow look of a woman who had buried her husband the previous March. Tom Hayes had frozen on a trap line when the blizzard hit without warning. She had found him 3 days later, stiff as fence wire. Since then, she'd moved through Red Hollow like a shadow, speaking when spoken to, nothing more. She watched the Comanche now, watched the way he stood straight under the ridicule, face carved from oak, not a flicker of anger showing. Something in that stillness reached across the smoky room and tugged at her. The laughter finally thinned. Someone bought a round to celebrate the joke. The Comanche took his whiskey, drank it without hurry, and turned to leave. As he passed her table, Eleanor spoke for the first time that night, voice low, but clear enough for him alone. "Is it true? About the cave?" He stopped, looked down at her. The noise of the saloon seemed to fade behind them. "It is true," he said. "Stone holds heat. Wind turns at the mouth. Soil is deep from old floods. Light comes in mornings. My grandfather sheltered there when snow buried the plains. She searched his face for mockery and found none. Why tell them? His mouth bent, not quite a smile. Because winter does not care who laughs. Then he was gone, doors swinging shut behind him, leaving only the cold draft and the smell of sage on his coat. Outside, the sky had gone iron gray. First flakes drifted past the windows like scout riders. 3 days later, Eleanor packed what little she owned into a burlap sack, 2 dresses, a Bible, her husband's coat still carrying his scent, and walked north out of town without telling a soul. Folks saw her go and figured grief had finally broken her. No one tried to stop her. The trail climbed through pinon and scrub oak until the valley dropped away behind. Raven Canyon cut a dark scar into the mountainside, its mouth wide and black against the snow-dusted rock. She found him there, kneeling beside a small fire, sharpening a skinning knife. He looked up once, nodded as if he'd known she would come, and went back to his blade. Eleanor dropped her sack and stood at the cave's edge, staring into the shadowed depths. Wind moaned through the opening, but it wasn't the killing wind she knew from the open plains. It turned, swirled, and died against the stone walls. Inside, the air felt different, warmer, earth-smelling. Tahan, that was the name he gave her later, when words between them no longer felt dangerous, rose and handed her a tin cup of coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. "You came," he said. "I got tired of dying slow in that town," she answered. He studied her a long moment, then turned and walked deeper into the cave. She followed. The main chamber opened wide, ceiling lost in darkness, floor level and dry. A thin seam high above let in pale light and drew smoke upward. At the back lay a thick layer of rich black soil washed in by ancient floods. Tahan pointed to it. "Here we plant. Here we live." Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest, small, fragile, but alive. Outside, the first real storm began to howl down from the peaks, sealing the canyon mouth with blowing white. Red Hollow would talk about the widow and the savage for weeks. They would say she'd gone mad with sorrow. They would say he'd bewitched her. None of them understood yet that 2 people had simply chosen not to freeze. Not that winter. Not if the stone and the soil and the stubborn silence between them held true. The storm sealed them in for 3 days straight. Snow piled against the cave mouth until only a narrow slit let in gray light. But inside, the air stayed tolerable. Never warm, but never the killing cold that clawed at exposed skin. Tahan worked with purpose. He stacked flat stones into low walls that trapped fire heat and threw it back. He sealed cracks with clay and ash where wind sneaked through. Smoke rose clean through the natural seam overhead, pulled by a draft he read like tracks. Eleanor watched, then joined, her hands blistered fast on stone and shovel. She mixed river silt with deer dung and wood ash until the soil turned rich. Tahan marked where morning sun struck deepest, 6 hours on clear days, and they built raised beds there, ringed with rock to hold warmth. Words stayed scarce. When they spoke, it was practical. Seed depth for radishes, banking fire for the night, storing meat against damp. By week's end, the cave had order. Central fire ring. Sleeping platforms of pine boughs and hides on opposite walls. Close for heat, far for space. Snowmelt channeled into a stone basin. One evening, Tahan returned from snares with 2 jackrabbits and trouble in his eyes. Boot tracks outside. Several men, circling but not entering. "They'll come," Eleanor said. "They watch already," he replied, skinning rabbits quick. Rumors drifted up anyway. Town talk claimed the widow lived with the savage, bewitched. Worse. Mid-November froze hard. Outside locked solid. Inside, green shoots broke soil. Lettuce, spinach, mustard. Pale but alive. Tahan built a stone lip across the mouth to break wind. Eleanor hung a heavy hide curtain for night. They tested draft, shifted stones, watched smoke rise true. Word of green spread faster than cold. One raw afternoon, hoofbeats echoed. 6 riders dismounted. Rifles easy. Sheriff Boone led, thick-shouldered, gray mustache, sharp eyes. He pushed the hide aside, stepped in. Snow shedding. His gaze took in the chamber. Neat earth beds, tiny green spears. 2 figures by fire. "Communal shed robbed," he said. "Tracks led here." Tahan rose slow, knife in hand from carving. "No stolen goods." Men searched anyway, poking corners, lifting hides. Found dried rabbit, Eleanor's cornmeal sack, nothing else. Deputy Riley stopped at the beds. "Greens. In this freeze," another muttered. "Injun trick." Eleanor stepped between men and plants, voice steady despite shake. "Soil, light, stone heat. That's all." Boone stared at leaves, then Tahan, then her. "You're living with him." "I'm living," Riley spat. "Folks say you've turned red, Mrs. Hayes." Tahan's grip tightened, but silent. Boone halted Riley with a hand. "No stolen goods. Enough today." At the exit, he paused. "Winter's coming harder than last. Sure about this?" "We're sure." Riders left. Tracks vanished under blowing snow by dusk. That night, temperature plunged. Eleanor woke to frost on the curtain. Tahan already fed fire, checked garden. Outer leaves nipped, but plants held. He covered beds with rawhide blankets on bitter nights, weighted down. Eleanor learned the cave's breath. Slow draft meant add wood. Strong pull meant bank coals. Days shrank. Sun barely cleared rim. Greens grew slow, steady. Late November, Tahan returned iced-bearded. Big storm, 2-3 days. Pass closes after. Eleanor eyed stores. Cornmeal, dried meat, winter greens promise. Enough for 2, careful. They pushed harder. Reinforced windbreak. Stocked wood on travois. More snares. Eleanor thinned seedlings for strength. Eve of the storm, wind howled alive. Snow hissed on stone. Inside, firelight danced on ancient walls. 2 people sat close to flames, listening to the mountain rage. They did not yet know the true storm brewed in Red Hollow, where hunger and old grudges sharpened fast. The big blow hit like Judgment Day. For 3 days the wind screamed down the canyon, driving snow in sheets thick as blankets. The world outside vanished, only white fury and the howl of a mountain trying to bury everything alive. Inside, Tahan and Eleanor rationed wood, and words alike. They harvested the first thin lettuce, bitter but alive, and stretched rabbit stew with roots. The cave held its temperature steady, stone giving back the fire's heat hour after hour. When the storm finally broke, the pass lay choked under drifts 20 feet deep. Raven Canyon became an island. Word from Red Hollow came slow. First a lone hunter on snowshoes, then nothing. The communal storehouse had burned to the ground one black night. Lantern tipped, folks said. No one pointed fingers. Blame wouldn't fill bellies. December turned savage. Temperatures dropped to 20 below and stayed there. Game vanished into deeper timber. Cattle froze standing in pastures. In town, stoves ate wood faster than men could haul it. Children's coughs grew wet and ragged. Old Mrs. Carver died first, quiet in her sleep. Then the Harlan boy, fever burning him from the inside out. Still, pride held. No one spoke of the cave. Not yet. Christmas Eve brought the second storm, worse than the first. Wind found every crack in every shack. Roofs groaned. One collapsed under weight of snow, trapping the Riley family. until neighbors dug them out half-frozen. By dawn on Christmas Day, 5 more graves had been scratched into iron ground. That night, the temperature bottomed out. Breath froze on beards. Dogs crawled under porches and didn't come out. A ragged column formed in Red Hollow. 15 souls, maybe 20. Pastor Townsend led, lantern swinging. Behind him came Dr. Harlan carrying his shivering daughter, Sheriff Boone supporting his wife, families clutching whatever blankets remained. They climbed the canyon trail on snowshoes and raw desperation, faces crusted white, moving slow as the dying. At the cave mouth, the hide curtain was laced tight. Smoke rose thin but steady from the seam high above, proof of life inside. Townsend pounded with a mittened fist. "Open, in the name of mercy!" The curtain parted just enough for Tahan's face, firelight behind him. His eyes took in the line of frozen figures without surprise. Eleanor stood at his shoulder, thinner now, cheeks hollow, coughing into a rag that came away spotted red. Townsend spoke first, voice cracking. "We've got 6 children. No wood left that'll burn. The town's dying, man. Let us in." Silence stretched, broken only by wind and a child's whimper. Tahan looked past the pastor to the faces he knew, men who had ridden against his people, women who had cheered the soldiers on. He saw Harlan's little girl blue-lipped in her father's arms. Eleanor touched his arm. "There's room. Barely. But room." He met her eyes. In them he saw the same memory. Comanche camps refused shelter by white settlers, fires denied, children left to the cold. His hand tightened on the curtain edge. "I have seen my people die outside doors like this," he said, low enough only she and Townsend heard. "I will not do the same." The curtain fell shut. The lacing was pulled tight from inside. Outside, pelouse rose. First reasoned, then desperate, then broken. A woman sobbed. Someone cursed. Snow kept falling. Eleanor leaned against the stone wall, sliding down until she sat. Tears cut clean tracks through soot on her face. "We just killed them." Tahan stared at the fire. "Or we live." The voices outside thinned as the storm reclaimed the night. By morning, only silence answered, when Eleanor cracked the curtain. Boot prints led away down the canyon, staggered and deep. Here and there, a dark bundle lay half-covered in fresh drift. 3, maybe 4. The rest had made it back, or tried. She closed the curtain and did not speak for 2 days. Guilt sat heavy as the snow outside. They ate less, moved less. The greens grew but tasted of ash. Tahan scouted once, came back grim. Town quieter, fewer smokes. Eleanor's cough worsened. Blood spotted the rag more often. She hid it, but he saw. If you're listening to this story and feeling that weight in your chest, the same weight Eleanor carried, hit that subscribe button right now. Stay with me. The hardest part is coming, and you need to see how it ends. Another storm gathered strength in early January, black clouds boiling over the peaks. This one promised to finish what the others started. Down in Red Hollow, the living numbered fewer than 30. Wood piles gone. Meat gone. Hope gone. They would come again, and this time, the door would have to open, or no one would be left to close it. The January storm rolled in like artillery from the north, black clouds boiling low enough to scrape the peaks. Wind hit the canyon walls and ricocheted down in gusts that could strip hide from bone. Red Hollow had shrunk to bones itself. 28 souls left, gaunt as scarecrows, eyes sunk deep from hunger. The last scraps of cornmeal were gone. Dogs had vanished days ago. Chimneys stood cold. They came at dusk on the 3rd day of the blow, a stumbling column of muffled figures dragging sleds of children and bedrolls. Pastor Townsend again at the front, but stooped now, lantern guttering in the gale. Sheriff Boone limped behind, frostbite blackening 2 fingers. Dr. Harlan carried his daughter wrapped tight against his chest. No one spoke when they reached the cave mouth. They simply stopped and waited, heads bowed against the driven snow. Inside, Tahan and Eleanor heard the scrape of snowshoes long before the shapes appeared. Eleanor's cough had turned deep and wet. Fever burned in her cheeks. Stores were down to a handful of dried meat and the winter greens, enough for 2 thin people another month, not 30. Tahan stood at the curtain a long minute, knife in belt, face unreadable. Eleanor laid a burning hand on his arm. If we turn them away again, we become the thing we hated. He looked at the garden beds, at the low woodrick, at the single pot over dying coals. Then he pulled the lacing free. The curtain swung open. Wind roared in, snuffing the fire to embers. Townsend's eyes widened. "You'll take us?" Tahan stepped aside. "Come, before the storm eats you." They poured in, staggering, shedding snow, collapsing against walls that still held the day's heat. Children whimpered. Someone sobbed once, sharp and cut off. The cave filled with the smell of wet wool and unwashed fear. Space vanished fast. Families pressed shoulder to shoulder. The fire was rebuilt larger, but wood disappeared in armloads. Tahan laid down rules the first night, voice flat, carrying over crackle and cough. Food shared equal. Wood rationed by head count. Garden tended by all. Break rule. 1 warning. Second time, out. No one argued. Days blurred into a grinding routine. Men took shifts, clearing ice from the water seep. Women boiled snow for drinking, stretched greens into soup thick enough to stick to ribs. Children were set to picking rocks from soil or carrying kindling. Tension simmered from the start. Old looks, suspicious, hateful, flicked toward Tahan whenever backs turned. Caleb Riley muttered loudest. He hoarded extra wood for his wife and 2 boys, claiming they burned colder. Eleanor caught him one dawn redirecting smoke from the main draft with a hidden stone, trying to warm his corner more. She confronted him quiet. "That weakens the whole draw. Fire dies. We all freeze." Caleb snarled low. "My young'uns come first." Word spread. By evening, the cave crackled with more than fire. Accusations flew. Someone shoved Caleb. Fists rose. Tahan stepped into the circle, knife drawn but point down. Silence fell hard. "Council decides," he said. "All speak." They argued an hour, voices raw, faces red in firelight. Mercy against survival. One man dead already from greed would warn others, some said. Vote went against Caleb. 12-8, with abstentions. Boone and Townsend tied his hands. They marched him to the mouth at first gray light. His wife screamed until her voice broke. The boys wailed. Caleb begged on his knees in the snow. "I'll freeze in an hour." Tahan's face stayed stone. "You chose." They cut him loose outside the curtain and pulled it shut. No one slept that night. Wind covered his cries quick. Morning showed only a drifted lump 100 yards down canyon. Wolves had come before dawn. After that, rules held iron. January dragged brutal. Temperature locked at 30 below. Ice rimed the curtain edges. Breath hung visible even deep inside. Greens became lifeline. Every leaf harvested, every root counted. Eleanor, fevered and weak, still taught women how to thin plants, how to trap cave heat under hide frames. The garden fed them, barely, but it fed them when nothing else remained. Faces grew sharper, tempers shorter, yet order held, forged in the memory of one fresh grave outside. Mid-month, the storm peaked. 8 straight days of whiteout. Woodrick dwindled to splinters. The last deer haunch went into soup watered thin. Dr. Harlan's daughter, little Mary, 8 years old, slipped into fever. Cough turned to rattle. Skin burned hot, then cold. Harlan worked over her with what herbs remained, voice breaking. "She won't last another night without strength." Tahan watched from shadows, then disappeared into the back chamber. The cave waited, holding its breath against the howl outside. What he brought back would decide if the door had opened for mercy or only delayed the dying. The cave waited, holding its breath against the howl outside. Tahan emerged from the deeper shadows carrying a small rawhide pouch, the kind warriors once tied to their belts for medicine on long raids. He knelt beside little Mary Harlan, her breaths shallow rasps under piled hides. Harlan looked up, eyes red-rimmed. Anything left? Tahan opened the pouch without reply. Dried sage, cedar bark, bear root, willow powder. He heated river stones in coals until they glowed, wrapped them in damp moss, and wringed the girl's body to pull fever slow and steady. He brewed the roots into bitter tea. Eleanor, fever-weak but determined, cradled Mary's head while Tahan fed it drop by drop. The cave fell silent. Wind battered the curtain like fists. All night, Mary hovered. Sweat broke, soaking hides. Breathing eased toward dawn. When pale light seeped in, the girl whispered, "Mama." Harlan folded over her, shoulders shaking. His wife clutched the child close. Pastor Townsend crossed the space and stopped before Tahan. "We owe you her life." Tahan met his eyes. "You owe the land. It gave the medicine." Townsend extended his hand. Tahan grasped it, hard, brief. After that, the air changed. Not peace, too many ghosts for that, but a raw truce. Men nodded passing Tahan. Women asked about plant spacing. Children shadowed him on snare rounds. February brought shorter blows. Sun reached deeper, coaxing fresh shoots. The cave's steady warmth turned soil-eager. Eleanor's cough eased. She walked rows again, teaching how to test moisture, pinch for yield. One clear day, Sheriff Boone found Tahan sharpening tools outside. "Pass might open March," Boone said. Tahan tested the blade. "It will." "Folks want you down there. Teach this." "I stay where stone remembers heat," Boone nodded. "Then they'll come up." First Valley Green showed late March. Families packed and left, awkward farewells, sleds loaded with seed packets, and smoke draft sketches. Townsend lingered last with Harlan and Mary, cheeks now round. "We'll build stronger," Townsend said. "Gardens inside town, using your ways." Harlan added, "Name a row for you?" Tahan shook his head. "Name it for the girl who breathed again." They descended. Canyon quieted to drip and wind. Eleanor stood beside Tahan, watching figures vanish. "They'll tell it different below. They always do." Years passed hard but steady. Red Hollow rebuilt. Chimneys that drew true. Gardens yielding into December. Travelers heard of the winter that broke a town and mended it strange. No marker bore Tahan's name. Men who once cursed him tipped hats when he traded salt. Women swapped jerky for his seeds. He never sought thanks. Eleanor never sought remorse. Evenings, they sat on flat rock at the mouth. Sunset painted peaks blood red. Wind turned familiar. Smoke rose clean. Greens grew defiant. Once, under pricked stars, Tahan spoke low. "My grandfathers hid here from rifles. We hide from nothing now." Eleanor rested her head brief against his shoulder, the only claim either needed. Far below, Red Hollow's lamps winked on, a town alive because hate had bent, once, to hunger. The cave at Raven Canyon endured, stone holding heat, turning wind, keeping promise older than any blood feud. It had waited millennia for listeners. One winter had been enough. The snow has melted from Raven Canyon now, but the stone still remembers that brutal winter of 1878. The lives it sheltered, the ones it couldn't, and the fragile line between enemy and survivor. One cave, one terrible season, and a handful of winter greens changed everything in Red Hollow. Hate didn't vanish overnight, but it bent far enough to let people live. What do you think? Could you have opened that door the second time? Would you have forgiven or walked away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. Thanks for staying with me through this story. It means a lot. If this one hit you hard, and you want more true frontier tales that wrestle with the raw edges of human nature, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next one might just break your heart all over again. See you in the next story.